Great Lakes Prepping here. Did you know that you can make real, legitimate, honest-to-goodness wine from ingredients that you probably have in your house right now? Using ordinary plain fruit juice from the grocery store, we're going to make about 6 quarts of wine, and the best part is, it doesn't taste half bad. So let's jump right in and look at our 3 ingredients. There's only 3 ingredients in the wine we're making today: fruit juice, ordinary white sugar, and bread yeast. Now before we get started, I'll mention one thing. You can absolutely make your wine in the original containers that your fruit juice comes in. In fact, a common way to do this is to use the 1.5 quart sort of rectangular plastic bottles that a lot of these types of juices come in, and it works quite well. But the problem is that I'm still having a little bit of trouble finding all of the products that I used to be able to find readily at the grocery store, and they still had plenty of juices to pick from, but most of them were in these smaller 1 quart bottles, and that's just silly to me to try to do all of this in individual bottles. So I'm going to end up using some of my beer making equipment and mix them up in these 1 gallon glass jugs. It won't quite fill these up. I've got 3 different flavors, so I've got 3 different jugs, but that's okay. It's going to work just fine. And speaking of my 3 flavors, here's what we have. Obviously, the classic grape wine. Can't go wrong there. I got my Concord grape juice. I've got some blueberry pomegranate. I really wanted to try blueberry wine, but blueberry pomegranate's what I was able to find this week. That's okay. Sounds good. And black cherry. Black cherry wine, I don't think I've ever had cherry wine, so I'm interested in trying that out. Strawberry wine, also very good. Had a hard time finding that juice at the store. Now, a lot of people like to make apple wine, and apple wine is kind of a common thing to make wine out of. If you've ever had Boone's Farm wine, that's generally apple wine. I personally don't like it. In fact, I rather hate apple juice, and I don't even like apple cider that much. So I'm going to skip the apple wine because I already know that it's not really for me. So we're going to give these a shot: the grape, the blueberry pomegranate, and the black cherry. Last thing I'll say before we start. You can use pretty much any kind of fruit juice, but you have to make sure that it's juice. And when I say just juice, I mean when you read the ingredients, it has juice as an ingredient, maybe filtered water. If it's from concentrate, that's okay. But what you don't want is a bunch of preservatives. I'm talking about various ingredients and preservatives that you probably can't even pronounce. You don't want those ingredients in your juice because it's going to make your wine not work. Your yeast is going to react to it, and it's probably going to kill it, and you're just going to end up with a bunch of weird tasting fruit juice. It's not going to turn into wine. So try to get the purest, plainest fruit juice you can find. So we're just about to pour our juice into the gallon jugs, but since we're taking the juice out of their original labeled containers, I want to make sure and label my jugs because these juices might not end up looking all that different, and I sure won't be able to tell which is which. Just a quick piece of masking tape, and we got a label. So now to pour in our juice. Here I got the grape. And I'll mention while this is pouring that you want to make sure to sanitize all of the equipment that you're using. You know, if you're going to make this wine in their original bottles, you don't really have to clean the bottle, nor could you. But any other materials you're using, the funnels, jugs, anything, you want to make sure to wash with a very mild bleach solution. Rinse them thoroughly so you know you don't have any bacteria or anything else that's going to affect your yeast and therefore your wine. All right, give the funnel a quick rinse and we'll move on to our next one. Here we got the blueberry pomegranate. I like the smell of this one. I'm a big fan of blueberries anyway. Anything with blueberry, I'm probably going to be a fan of. And our black cherry. Now, like I said, you want to use pure, plain fruit juices. If they're from concentrates, that's fine, but what you really want to avoid are any concoctions that say cocktail. You know, there's some enticing sounding flavors, strawberry, kiwi, pomegranate, whatever, but then it says cocktail after those words, and you look at the ingredients, and it's got all sorts of different added corn syrups and acerbate, this and that, words that I can't pronounce, let alone try to make up right now. But there's a lot of variety of plain fruit juices out there. And you know, if I went to like a Whole Foods or a fancy store, I'm sure I could find just everything, as long as I'm willing to pay for it. I didn't want to go too crazy. I just went with what was at the normal grocery store. I think it's going to be a good variety. All right, next thing we need to do is add our sugar. What you want to do is add 1 cup of ordinary white sugar per quart of juice. I've got 2 quarts of juice, so I've got 2 cups of sugar. And I think my funnel is a little on the small side, so I'm going to really do my best not to make a huge mess. Go ahead and use a little measuring cup as a scoop here. Now, if you're going to do this in its original bottle, you're going to find that the juice is pretty much all the way at the top. So what that means is you have to empty just a little of your juice out before you start. Otherwise, there's going to be no room for the sugar and yeast. But since I'm using these jugs that are plenty big, I don't have to worry about that. Now, if you're going to be doing any kind of brewing on a small scale, beer, wine, I know people like kombucha and that kind of thing, a set of these little jugs are just awesome. I use these things for all sorts of stuff, and it just happened to be the perfect thing for my wine making today. So why do we add the sugar? Fruit juice is naturally quite sweet, so what are we doing adding all this extra sugar? Well, the answer is simply because we need to give the yeast something to eat, the byproduct of which is alcohol. If we didn't add sugar, but we did add the yeast, we might get a little bit of an alcoholic content, but not really enough to be able to rightly call it wine. So we have to add this extra sugar, and after the yeast is done eating it all up, it'll pretty much just settle to the bottom of the jug and kind of be dead basically. And around that time is when the wine is officially wine, and that can take 2 weeks, a week, just kind of depends. But after that happens, most people would like to let their wine sit a little longer, because that's when you start developing a better flavor. You don't have to age this stuff for 20 years. I mean, this is really just a step above, prison wine. Let's be honest about what we're doing here. But letting it age a little bit will make that flavor a lot nicer, a lot more palatable. And you could let it age a month, 2 months, 3 months. But in these jugs right here, with the way I'm doing this, I'm looking at about, I think 3 weeks is what I'll go for. And this next step is really the hardest part of the whole operation. It's the only part that anyone might call hard. And that's shaking up your juice sugar mixture. And you want to really thoroughly shake it up so it dissolves. When we start here, you can see that all that sugar has settled to the bottom. And this thing's, 2 quarts of liquid plus the kind of heavy glass jug. So it's a little strenuous to shake this for a good solid 2 minutes. The smaller plastic 1.5 quart containers might be a little easier, but either way, you want to shake the bejesus out of this for a solid, we'll say 2 minutes. And I won't show the whole 6 minutes of me wheezing and shaking these things, so we'll just sort of jump ahead. Okay, now the next step is to add the yeast. But before I do that, I'm going to do one thing that is definitely an optional. But since I have the stuff to do it, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And that's to determine the specific gravity of the juice sugar mixture. That's considered the starting specific gravity. And why would I do this? Well, because if you know the starting specific gravity of your mixture, and you know the specific gravity after it's done fermenting, you can very easily calculate the alcohol content. You definitely don't need to do this. You could just make some wine and then give it a taste and say, yep, that tastes pretty alcoholic. But since I have the stuff to do it, I might as well. And the little tool that we use to determine the specific gravity of a liquid is this thing called a hydrometer. And what this does is floats in the liquid, and right at the edge of where the surface of the liquid is, you'll have a marking. You write that marking down, that's your specific gravity. And in this case, our starting specific gravity. Now, you don't have to use a graduated cylinder like this, but it makes it easier. And you know what? It came with my hydrometer, so I might as well use it. And to do this, I need to very carefully fill it up with liquid from the jug. So let's see if I can do that without spilling a ton of it. Doesn't really matter how much you fill it, as long as it's enough for your hydrometer to sort of float in it. And I've got a little foam going on with my sugar juice mixture. I might let this settle for just a couple minutes, not too long, just let those bubbles break up a little bit. Well, the foam's gone down a little, enough to work with, I think, so we're just going to go ahead and drop our sanitized hydrometer into the graduated cylinder. Let it bob for a second until it comes to a rest. And it might be pretty hard to read through this plastic cylinder, but what we want to see is where the marking on the hydrometer is, right where the level of liquid comes up to. Well, I know this is going to be tricky to see on camera, but the level of the liquid came up to just about this line here where my thumbnail is, right at the edge of this blue section. So that puts our starting specific gravity at just about 1.13. Now, after this is done fermenting, we'll take it again. And then there's a simple formula to determine your alcohol content. Basically, it's your starting specific gravity minus your final specific gravity divided by 0.776. And that gives you your alcohol by volume percentage. I don't know why that's the formula. I don't know why it's 0.776, but that's the formula, so that's what we'll do. So just as we labeled the jug with which fruit juice it contains, I'm going to go ahead and make sure to label each of them with the starting specific gravity, because I know I'm going to forget it, and if I write it down somewhere else, I might lose it. So right here on the jug it goes. I'm going to go ahead and do this with the blueberry pomegranate and the cherry, and then we're going to start adding our yeast. Alright, our starting specific gravity has been measured and recorded, and they're quite a bit different from one to the next, actually. It seems like a very small number, but that matters when it comes to calculating the alcohol by volume. The grape was 1.13, the blueberry pomegranate 1.115, and the cherry 1.144. So quite a range of starting specific gravities. But what really matters is the final specific gravity to help us determine that alcohol. volume. So the only ingredient we have to add is our yeast. And for this, since this is, like I said, the very simple winemaking that you can do with stuff you might already have in your house, we're using ordinary bread yeast. You can definitely buy wine yeast that has been sort of a specialty formulated to work the best with wine. You'll get, the best wine that you could possibly get by using wine yeast. And I don't know a lot about yeasts except, I'll use the recommended kind for the kind of beer I might be making or wine or whatever. But since this is our sort of, prepper prison wine sort of recipe here, we're going to go ahead and use bread yeast. And I really want to show you how that works and basically prove the concept that you don't need special fancy ingredients to make some real wine. So all we have to do is add this. Now, the rule of thumb that I'm using for the yeast quantity is 1/4 teaspoon per quart of juice. And again, since I have 2 quarts of juice in each of these, that's 1/2 teaspoon of regular old bread yeast. You can give it a little swirl if you want, just to kind of distribute it a little bit over the surface of the liquid, but you don't really need to shake these. You don't want to mess with it too much. It's in there, it's going to do its thing, and you really don't want to ever shake these or really agitate them from this point on, especially once they really start the fermentation process. So now we need to talk a little bit about what happens during fermentation. When the yeast consumes the sugar, it creates carbon dioxide and also the byproduct alcohol. But when it creates those carbon dioxide gases, it needs to go somewhere. And that's why we can't just seal these jugs up and leave them that way. We have to leave them vented. And there's a couple ways you can do that. If you're using one of the original containers that the juice comes in, you can just loosen it just slightly, enough that you can move the lid up and down a little bit, but not so much that it's tight. If you leave it a little bit loose, stuff can't really get in there, debris, outside, contaminants, anything like that. But gases inside can still escape. Well, I could do that with the little lids I have for these jugs, but since I have the, quote, proper equipment, I'm going to go ahead and use that. And in this case, the proper equipment is first this little thing, which is a little stopper for the jug. Its official name is a bung, and the kind I'm using has a hole in it. And the reason for the hole is so I can put this thing in it, and this is an airlock. And what we do is fill it with a little bit of water, put it in here, put the whole thing in the jug, and as gases build up and need to escape, they can escape. They'll bubble out through the water, but nothing can get in, and that's the important part. No outside contaminants can really work their way through this. So I'm going to put a little bit of water in this and get the airlock and bung in each one of the jugs. Alright, so here we have all 3 of our jugs. Airlocks are in, filled with a little bit of water, and they're all done. We're done for now. Now what I'm going to do is let these sit. I'm going to put them somewhere in a dark, cool place where I'm not going to disturb them, and I'm just going to let them sit for probably about 3 weeks. Now, I will check on them every day to make sure that I see bubbles forming. It might take a few more minutes before they start bubbling, but it'll happen relatively soon, where that yeast will start eating that sugar, and it'll start releasing gases, and you'll see bubbles in here. And these things ought to be bubbling pretty good for at least a few days. If they start bubbling and then stop within like a day, or they never start bubbling, then something was probably wrong with your yeast, and the effect is not happening, and you've pretty much got a bad batch. It's just going to be pretty much blown, and there's no way around that. It could happen once in a while, but if you do everything pretty much like I showed you, the success rate is pretty high. And because nobody likes a cliffhanger, I'm not going to do one of those things where I end the video here and then weeks from now I'll do a follow-up video to show you how it came out. No, I'm not going to do that to you. So what we're going to do is stop the video here, and I'm going to pick it up about 3 weeks from now. And we're going to check it out, see how it came out, and determine the alcohol content of each one and give it a taste test. So you'll see me in about 5 seconds, but I'll see you in about 3 weeks. Well, it's been just about 3 weeks, and it's been a few days since I've seen any bubbles coming out of the airlocks. So that pretty much means that the fermentation process is complete. Now, this is the point in winemaking when you might ordinarily take the wine out of the jug or whatever you've been fermenting it in, leaving behind as much of the sediment as possible, that's the dead yeast and so forth, and basically siphoning the wine into a bottle. And it's in the bottle that you would let it sit and age. And of course, aging the wine is where you get more of a refined taste and clarity and so forth. But being that this is more or less hillbilly wine, I'm not going to age them in these bottles really, but I am going to take the wine out of these jugs and put it in the bottles. I don't have to do that. I could serve it right out of these jugs, but I really do like the idea of siphoning the wine out of here to get it out of all that sediment. That sediment's just going to serve to maybe foul the taste at this point, or at least not help the taste. And it'll also help for clarity, which I guess I don't care that much about, but it'll make for a prettier wine anyhow. So since there's about half a gallon in each of these jugs, I'm going to need 2 bottles per jug. So I've got 6 of these wine bottles, all sanitized and ready to go. Now I could just carefully pour the wine out of these jugs, doing my best to not pour the sediment out. But as I mentioned earlier, I have some beer making equipment, and this little tool right here is called a siphon pump, and it makes very quick work out of getting the wine or whatever out of one container to go into another container, in this case, a wine bottle. And to use this, first I'll attach the plastic tubing to the end here, and I'll put this into the jug. And it has this kind of end here that helps ensure that it only takes liquid from about here up, and that, leaves most of your sediment behind. Now the way this works is you kind of get it started by giving it a couple pumps, and I could just sort of repeatedly pump it to move liquid into the bottle, or I could just pump it a couple times to get a siphon going and basically put the bottle on the floor with the other end of the tube in it, and it'll fill it up. There's also a cool little tool that I don't have anymore called a racking cane, which is sort of a rod that goes at the end of the tube, and it allows you to sort of keep your siphon pressure built up while you go in between various bottles. I don't have one of those anymore, so I'm just going to make do with this, and it'll work just fine. Okay, and before I start filling the second bottle, I am going to put a little in my graduated cylinder so I can take my final specific gravity reading. And it'll be impossible to see this on camera, but for the grape wine, my final specific gravity is 1.054. So real quick, let's use the formula. that starting gravity minus a final gravity. So we have 1.130 minus 1.054 divided by 0.776. And that makes our alcohol content just about 9.8%. All right, and I'll just go ahead and fill up this second bottle of the grape. Now I hope you can see this in the video. It's gonna be kind of hard unless the lighting is just right, but there's a lot of sediment just sort of floating, or not even floating, just stuck to the bottom of the jug. And I could take this last little bit of wine out of here, but it's mixed with sediment at this point, and it won't fit in my 2 bottles, and I don't really want to keep that so much anyway, so I'm comfortable just kind of discarding this last little bit. I'm just going to move this out of the way, and we're going to start with the blueberry pomegranate. Okay, and for the blueberry pomegranate, our final specific gravity is 1.034, which means our alcohol by volume is 10.4%. So we're getting a little better. Well, our cherry wine had a final specific gravity of 1.072, which brings our alcohol by volume to 9.3%. So yeah, we're right in that same area, and it's not the highest. This isn't a real refined process, so to speak, but I don't think that's half shabby for what we're doing here. And now all that's left to do is cap the bottles. I don't have fancy corks or anything like that. I've just got some simple plastic caps. And for this wine, that's gonna work just fine. If I was really worried about aging and all that kind of stuff, well, I would go the extra steps and do everything the real fancy way. But for this, that's all I need. And here we have it, 6 bottles of homemade fruit juice wine. I'm pretty excited to try these out. I'm gonna chill a little bit of each of these, and in a little while, I'm gonna give it a sampling. So we'll pick it up there. First up, we have the classic grape red wine. You know, I'm about the farthest thing from a wine connoisseur who's ever lived. And my taste in wine is a little bit of a paradox, because I don't like sweet beverages, but I don't really love dry wine. And I would say that this is actually quite a nice balance in between dry and sweet. It's not overwhelmingly sweet by any means, but it's not so dry that, I can't enjoy it. I actually really rather like this grape wine. I think it tastes pretty good. Now, is the flavor affected in that it's not as high of an alcohol content as a ordinary properly made wine? Well, I'm sure. This, I guess, might be just a touch still closer to fruit juice than wine in that regard, but it's still, by all definition, wine, and over 9% alcohol by volume. So I could really see enjoying some of this just on any normal day. Next, the blueberry pomegranate, which I personally think looks the prettiest. It's not exactly what I expected, I had the highest hopes for the blueberry pomegranate because in fruit juice form, That's the juice that I liked the best by quite a long shot. And blueberry's my favorite fruit, and blueberry juice is delicious. But this came out tasting and smelling really nothing like blueberry. I mean, a little bit, I guess, but no, the taste is completely changed in the fermentation process. It's still such a pretty color, and it's quite a bit lighter than either of the other two. But it's got an odd taste. I'd say it's a good taste, and the more I try it, the better I like it. I will say I was a little worried when I first smelled it after bringing the glass jugs upstairs and taking a big sniff. It didn't smell real great to me. It was just a little odd smelling. I wouldn't say it was vinegary. It's just my brain doesn't know how to process the smell of fermented blueberries and pomegranate, I guess, and that's what it smells like. But the taste isn't bad at all. I don't think I like it more than the red grape wine so far, but yeah, I don't think any of this will go to waste. I'm not sure that I'll make it again quite the same way. I will say I do want to try making blueberry wine from pure fresh blueberries. It's something I've always wanted to try, so I'm sure I'll still do that. But as far as the blueberry pomegranate juice wine, I don't know, I might not make this one again. And then, of course, the cherry wine, which is quite dark and even a little thicker looking than the other two. The cherry wine actually has a lot of similarities in taste to the grape wine, but it's got a distinct cherry flavor to it, obviously. It's funny how that works when you ferment pure grape juice and you ferment pure cherry juice. Those similar tastes that come through in both of them. I think this is a bit sweeter than either of the other two, and I don't necessarily love that. And considering I don't think I've ever had cherry wine before, I think it's pretty good. Somebody who likes a sweeter wine would probably like this a little more than me. It's got a very rich, sort of bold taste, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend like I know wine terminology and say it's full-bodied or anything like that, because I don't really entirely know what that even means. But yeah, like the other two, these bottles are not going to go to waste. I rather enjoy that. But out of the three, I think my favorite is the grape wine. And I'm not going to just take my own opinion for it. I really want to get a couple of other opinions on these wines. So I'm going to bring in a couple of friends of mine. So we're going to jump forward another day or two and pick up with a second wine tasting.
Hi! We're going to start with the grape wine. Wow, that's good.
Yeah, it's very good. Very sweet.
Mm-hmm. If you said it was from a store, I would believe you it came from a store. Because it tastes very good and it smells very good. Mm-hmm. And it's very dark.
Very consistent. It's got nice flavor. It's definitely not a dry wine.
No, I would say this is probably one of the sweeter non-Moscatos I've ever had. If you ask me. And I would like some more.
You could drink a lot of it not realize that you're gonna get drunk.
You're gonna get drunk. This is blueberry pomegranate.
Yeah. Don't smell it.
Don't smell it.
Tastes better than it smells, but definitely the aftertaste is much better.
I like the first one best so far. I'll drink it.
I would still drink it.
I would still drink it if it was in front of me, but the first one is the best. This is cherry wine.
Smells like cherries. That's all I can hope for.
I like it. This is the least, this tastes like cherries. This tastes like...
It's the least wine.
I don't feel like there's any alcohol in this. I feel like this is just cherry juice, which makes it interesting because I know that there's alcohol in it. But It doesn't taste like it. It doesn't smell. It just smells very good, like cherries. You would never know that this isn't just cherries to me. It's like you were eating a tart cherry or a sweet cherry. I like that a lot. My first one is still, I like the grape one best. This is very good though. I would drink both of those again.
To grape wine.
Delicious.
So that's about it. Fruit juice, sugar, and ordinary yeast are all you need to make a basic sweet wine that's pretty tasty and ready to drink in about 3 weeks. And because this video ended up being a lot longer than it probably needed to be, I'm going to end up making a shortened recut with a voiceover that just covers the basic instructions and leaves out most of my jibber jabbing. Basically an abridged version of this video. So keep an eye out for that in the near future, and if you made it this far, thanks for watching. That's it for now, and until next time, this is Great Lakes Prepping.